Welcome everyone to today's technical webinar organized by the Global Action Partnership for EPR. My name is Angelina Schreiner and I'm from Prevent Waste Alliance. And in today's webinar, we will focus on common EPR setups and architectures. But before we start, some housekeeping rules on the next slide. Please mute yourself during the inputs and please be aware that the event is being recorded. So by participating, you consent to the recording. Please follow the chat for updates and use it to pose your questions. You can post your questions already during the inputs and they will be taken up at the end of the meeting. And during the discussion part, you can, of course, also react by using the raise hand feature. And please also indicate your name and organization when posting a question in the chat or when you speak up. Thank you. Here's also a short disclaimer. Please note that the views and opinions of the experts expressed in the webinar do not reflect the positions of all core partners of the Global Action Partnership for EPR, nor of Prevent Waste Alliance members or official policy positions of the international organizations and governments involved. Thank you. And here you see already the slide on the Global Action Partnership for EPR. So just a short recap for those of you who don't know us yet. So GIZ, WWF and OECD have partnered to establish the Global Action Partnership for EPR. And this GAP for EPR is hosted by Prevent Waste Alliance, and the partnership also receives circular economy support from the LMAC Alpha Foundation and is also in close collaboration with UNEP on providing technical support to governments and PROs. And as you can see on the slides, we currently focus on three main pillars. The first one is the library with all main documents on EPR, like the EPR toolbox, a comprehensive guide on what EPR is and how it can be implemented. Then the second pillar is the help desk. The EPR help desk supports your EPR journey with its pool of global experts. And here's also an invitation to all of you. Do you have a specific question regarding your EPR journey? Simply send us a request and we will match you with an expert who can provide the guidance on that you require. And for most stakeholders from low and middle income countries, the help desk is generally free of charge. So just check out the help desk on our website. And the third pillar is the community. It's a space for peer-to-peer learning, to connect with other EPR practitioners and to learn from each other. And of course, it's also a platform to discuss EPR a bit more critically and to innovate EPR. And the GAP for EPR was launched in October, and during the launch event, we received many technical questions from all of you. And we would like to answer all these questions in the technical webinars with support of our EPR experts. So we have set up 3 webinars, the first one being today on common EPR setups and architectures. Then the second part will be on data needs and monitoring, which will take place on 11th of December. And the third one on 20th of December will focus on costs, fees, and eco-modulation. So don't worry if your question on, for example, monitoring is not answered today, it will be answered in the second webinar. And also, if you can join the second or the third webinar, it will be also recorded and all the recordings will be uploaded on the YouTube channel of Prevent Waste Alliance. So you can watch all the webinars there as well. With that, I'd like to move on to the presentation of today's experts. We have Fred Ajay with us. He's a researcher at the Öko Institute. And we also have Andreas Mannhardt with us. He's a senior researcher at Öko Institute. And Frederick, I'm sorry, I'm muting you for a second because there's an echo. Sorry for that. And yeah, the Öko Institute is one of Europe's leading independent research and consultancy nonprofit organizations. The institute focuses on circular economy and waste management, providing technical and financial support in the international waste sector and contributing to environmental policy development. And please note that we also have other experts from Öko-Institut and Cyclos in the call who are available to support us too in case you have very specific questions. So warm welcome to all of our experts. And with that, I'd like to hand over to you, Fred.
Thank you so much, Angelina. My name is Fred Ajay, as mentioned. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and it's really lovely to see all of you. I'm happy that I'm not alone. I'm with my colleague Andreas Manhart, but today he's unfortunately under the weather, so you have only me mostly, but he will of course contribute as and when needed. Also, there's Jana, there's Nicola, so I feel very much in good company. Yeah. So I have spent I'm under 1 year with Öko. I now call Berlin home for the past 4 years, and I'm originally from Ghana. It's really interesting to see the questions that have come up in the launch for GAP for EPR. And I'm really happy to be able to go into these questions with you. So as you can see, we have an overview of questions. We will take them one by one. We will discuss them. I think they're really, really interesting questions, and they really go to the heart of EPR. And I believe that at the end of the day, we would have a fair understanding where we are going, or where we've been, where we're going, and how to get there in the best possible way that suits each individual situation. Right. So we take the first one, EPR costs on products. How serious are the impacts? This is a very, very, very important question. It's a question on everybody's minds, on consumers, on governments, on municipalities. What's going to happen when we implement EPR? Okay, we take it from the back, a little bit going back behind the scene and look at the waste situation. We have a problem with waste management generally. It is a burden to society, pollution, nuisance, risk. The thing is that we will always pay the cost. No matter what happens, somebody has to pay the cost. It's not going to disappear. We are either going to pay with money or we're going to pay with our lives. We're going to pay with the noise that is created. We will pay with the smell that is generated. And unfortunately, it always affects the poor and marginalized in society. So this is going to happen. Now, without EPR, what choices do we have? You know, we've all heard of the anecdote, waste is a resource, there's money in the gutter, but really, how much money is there in waste? There are really some fractions. We can go the free market approach that can self-finance. You know, we can take some metals, we can take some valuable fractions, but at most, this can take care of maybe 20% of the fractions we have. We can look at voluntary initiatives. I know in my own home country, sometimes we have community initiatives. Hey, let's go clean up here, let's go clean up there. But honestly, in most situations, this is very limited in geographical scope, in frequency as well. You can have a really strong community intervention, maybe 2-3 times, but after a while, people go like, maybe I don't want to spend my Saturday doing this. You have volunteer fatigue, you have NGO fatigue. NGOs come and go. They are not, we don't know how reliable these organizations are, or from producers themselves. So again, we have these limitations there, that these two, free market approach that waste management finances itself, this is generally insufficient to handle the problems we have. We can look at fees, municipal fees, but the question is, by how much can you increase these fees? Even the legislation needed to increase the fees, how to even spend it is a problem in some ways. Or we can look at national taxes. But in most countries, increasing national taxes is quite the hurdle. When you realize, okay, this is not sufficient to handle the waste situation we have, we should go higher. We need parliamentary approval. We need this process and that process. Let's just say we get it. We have been able to increase our taxes significantly. How do we spend it? Now we have public procurement. We need this approval. We go into the finance ministry, and maybe this financing is not even ring-fenced. In some countries, it is ring-fenced, but usually you will have problems there. It has gone to finance some roads somewhere. It has gone to finance that, because the finance ministry is very happy to look at a giant pot, but spending this in the area that is needed, you will have some limitations. So we say this is limited. This gives us the only tool to use being EPR. So let's take it from the basics. Now we say that we want to make the polluter pay, actually. We just don't want to make traditional producers who just put items on the market, consumer purchases them and that's it. He gets his money or they get their money and that's it. They go away. All is good. No, we want to extend this responsibility as well to the end of life of these products. This is what we want to do. And the question that we actually have is, well, by how much will this increase prices? How much? What is the damage that is going to happen to the consumer at the end of the day? Now, looking at some data from France via our colleague Cyclos, we can look at some items that are common in many areas. You have this in your countries, it's in my country, it's in Berlin as well. And looking at the data, we can see from the last line, 0.38%, 0.68%, 0.2%. This is not much. It will increase. The simple answer is that yes, prices will increase, but not by much, indeed. So to summarize on that question, yes, we will have this kind of a little bit an increase in consumer prices, but really not that much. And without EPR, the only options we have is either we increase municipal waste management fees, which we know have problems, higher taxes with their limitations, or we accept that we will pay this cost with our health or with the environment. It's as simple as that. But compared to these, EPR really gives us the fairest distribution model. At least we make sure that the more you consume, the more you pay. And I like to say that if you really want to enjoy that pineapple in the middle of winter, you should pay for the packaging that keeps it fresh. This is a simple responsibility to the consumer. At least you should pay for the extra benefit that you want to enjoy. And at least in this way, producers have some incentive to reduce packaging volumes and improve on their designs. So I think that gives us quite a good basis to move on into the next question. Please remember, if you have questions, please put them in the chats and we will have time to go back and then look at them holistically. Right. Now to the second question, what should be the scope? This is a very, very crucial question and it really comes up on everybody's minds. Should it be plastic packaging, all packaging, other products? What should we do? How should we look at it? Well, so why packaging? If you look at this, a lot of the trash we find in municipal solid waste is packaging. I like to think of it this way. Think of the job to be done. If you are thirsty, you are not really looking at packaging. You are looking for water. If you're looking for food, it's the food you're interested in. Whatever it is in that container, it's the contents that you are interested in. At the end of the day, what is left behind, the residue, is packaging. So why not focus on plastic or plastic packaging, for example? Think about it this way. If you should take out that plastic from this picture you see on the left-hand side, you still have packaging left. In my home country, the mosquitoes will still be very happy. They have a place to stay. There's still metal there. There's still there. The problem is still there. You've taken away something, but you still have packaging there. Also, if you say, okay, let's focus on plastic, that is also incredibly complex. Which products? And so many products are actually a combination of so many other parts. So it's probably better to look at packaging. But also, if you say plastic, okay, producers see it, okay, plastic is banned, or okay, we simply shift to other materials. Also, these materials may not be as better as is thought. Single-use aluminum or glass, for example, have really high environmental impacts, especially in the production phase. So focusing on plastic may lead to unintended consequences. So better on the highest level to look at functions, not necessarily the product. And really the function is packaging. So this is our recommendation. But somebody says, okay, what about really problematic issues like, again, plastics? This is really, it will keep coming up. What about these problematic plastics and products that we see around? And well, not to lose hope. It is possible to add specific products, but we recommend to look at some criteria for such an addition. It must be clearly identifiable in the waste stream. It must be associated with maybe really high management costs. And also we should see that the problem itself, if left unmanaged, would be a significant burden to the society and to the environment. You can see some examples. Fishing nets, very clearly identifiable. We go there, we see it, it's there. Cigarette filters, it's also there. You can trace who is producing it. You can see it there. It's clearly identifiable. Or single-use plates and cutlery. Perhaps if you are aware of upcoming legislation, packaging with legislation, for example, in Germany, there is a consideration to take EPR fees for cigarette filters, for example. although it's on packaging, there is still the opportunity to add additional products. But I have to say that the moment you start adding products, be aware that you are adding an extra layer of complexity to the solution. Again, to summarize here, a focus on packaging is recommended. And this leads to better management, because to manage this on a stable level, you need to have stable financing. It's important to identify these streams that really have a high share in municipal solid waste. Again, focusing on plastic might have unintended consequences. Single-use glass and metal is not better than plastic. It is anecdotal. There's always the discussion, we should ban plastic. This, in many scenarios, might be a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. A more relaxed approach, a more holistic approach, and some in-depth thinking would point out that indeed you need to look at a few factors before making such quick reactions that in the long run may give you these unintended material substitutions. Finally, it's important to know that it's not lost. You can still add products. You can still add products if you wish, but once you keep adding these products, you are increasing the complexity in your EPR system. Moving on to the next question. This is personally a favorite question of mine. How to implement EPR in situations of limited enforcement capacities and resources. Unfortunately, in many parts of the world, we don't have endless enforcement capacities or endless resources. What we do, we can look at a few situations, or we can look at a few scenarios, what we can do to solve this. We can oblige parties to look at perhaps a sub-definition, or perhaps looking at the product scope to identify the most problematic fractions. Let's look at this diagram, for example, industry packaging. This is probably out of scope. Already there's value there. Most industries trade between each other on a B2B level. We don't need to focus there. This is not what is creating a lot of municipal solid waste. Probably we don't even see this at all. Service packaging as well is already gathered in one place. We know where they are. With a few buses or with a few trucks, this problem goes away. But it's the household packaging that's giving the problem. And even within there, you can see what is the most problematic fractions, and these are usually composite materials. If you take single materials, the technology to recycle are usually available, the know-how is available, this does not give you problems. But when you have laminates, when you have combinations of materials, now you need additional technology, now you need additional know-how. This is what is giving you issues. Now remember, we don't have, if we had endless resources, endless enforcement capacities, yes, we could tackle everything. But if we don't have that, we must be strategic. Another tool we can use is to think of a phased approach. Again, perhaps you can start your EPR by maybe in the first year, second year, maybe reporting obligations on all product packaging brought onto the market. Of course, differentiated into predefined subtypes. What is it this kind of plastic, that kind of composite? And then start with perhaps maybe 40% composite materials. Just take your time and start slow. And then in the second, third, fourth year, you can increase this as you go along. This also gives time for municipalities, for enforcement agencies to build experience, to build capacity, and to be able to go forward at a rate that can be handled. What you don't want to do, what I have to really point out to you, is that if you start with everything, very, very ambitious, you want composites, you want this, you want that, and producers find out that you have an inability to enforce, you have created now a dynamic in the mind that is very, very difficult to break. Also bear in mind that you probably can't arrest everyone. You can't put all producers in jail. So it's better to start small, to start in a way that you can enforce regulations and then build capacities over time. Now let's look at a third scenario that might happen. These are fictional organizations. We have Snack King, Food Queen, Free Riding. You probably know where I'm going with this. But let's see these two organizations, Snack King and Food Queen. They are very happy to support PROs. They have the organizations, they are reporting on data volumes. Authorities are then complying. I've learned of a new game, Whack-A-Mole. where something pops up and then you hit it on the head. There is a dynamic, you know, I don't know, it's there's a dynamic that if you show your face, now you are known, right? So most organizations, most enforcement authorities, for example, now we know you are here, we know your location, you just reported to us all your data, now we can check. Now the Environmental Protection Agency is coming, now the customs are coming, everybody, now you have the data. Ooh, you've not been paying enough taxes. So you see that this would create some fear in Snack King and Food Queens, but we were trying to comply. But this organization here, Riding Free, is simply hiding, says nothing, does nothing, and just goes away scot-free. This is dangerous. Not only is this third party polluting the environment as much as they like, but they are also benefiting. They're probably making higher profits. They're very happy. Now, Snack King and Food Queen would probably be discouraged and find ways to also evade the system. Of course, it's simply unfair. So it's important that in this scenario, to focus your limited enforcement capacities to capture free riders. Of course, we don't say ignore the Snack King and Food Queen, but know where to put your energy at least. Support those who are complying and really focus your limited enforcement capacities on free riders. Now, to summarize, we have a few tools. Consider focusing on the worst packaging types in the beginning, at least. Remember, you can always extend if you want. Apply a phased approach. Start small and increase over time. This is the best way to go, or at least in our recommendation. And then focus your limited enforcement resources on free riders. In fact, it's important to encourage those who are complying, who want to support the system. It's more beneficial to have there a carrot than a stick. Now going to the next question. This is also a very, very, very deep question. I know, for example, in my home country, Ghana, we've had this discussion, or it's come up several times, and I'm happy to see Mr. Oliver Boachi here. Thank you so much for joining us. How to cover the cost to set up an EPR system? Now, to answer this, let's go back a little bit into the kind of archetypes that we have. In some areas, and this is usually favored by most transitioning economies, you have governments setting up regulations, taking taxes, eco-levies, eco-taxes, e-waste fund, many, many names, but they're always like this. They set regulations, they take taxes from producers and importers. Bear in mind, in some countries, there are not so many producers, mostly importers. These are the organizations bringing products onto the market. And then government takes the role of either setting up an agency to handle the end-of-life management of waste, or interested PROs to handle end-of-life management. This has high costs for governments. I mean, it is attractive in that we don't have the money. We can take the money from producers and importers to solve the problem. But the thing is, the moment you take this money from producers and importers, the responsibility moves now to governments to solve the problem. And you must solve the problem from today. So it needs a high level of investment from government immediately to solve the situation. Again, if you take your mind back to the first slides that I mentioned, you have taxes. Now you have some red tape, you have procurement regulations, you have to now, you don't know whether this money is ring-fenced or not, you have to now trace it. How much has been collected? How is it being expended? To even make any amendment, must it go to Parliament? Are we talking about a legislative instrument? Are we talking about this has its own benefits? Now we have another system where we have perhaps privately organized systems, often termed the real EPR, but I say both are EPR, but usually this is what we call real EPR. So government only makes regulations, and then producers and importers set up their own systems through PROs to handle end-of-life management. This perhaps has lower cost for government. Government is simply looking at perhaps reporting data, perhaps enforcing regulation, changing the regulation as the system is changing, as technology changes. Yeah, this is also a bit. It has its own benefits, and I say that we do not recommend one system or the other, but look at your system, look at the local situation, and decide what would work best in that situation. Again, we want to say, look at the most problematic types. What is the most problematic situation that you're facing? And this would perhaps support you in making a decision how to go. So how to cover the cost for EPR systems? Choose a model that does not overwhelm authorities. Choose a model that works for you so that authorities can focus on their core tasks of policy development, monitoring, and enforcement. If you choose a model that is simply unenforceable in your local situation, again, you set a dynamic that cannot be changed later. This is problematic. And you should as well focus on the types that causes the biggest end-of-life problems in that situation. Of course, always bearing in mind that you can always extend the scope. You can always make changes in future as the situation allows. Yeah. To the next question, this is also a very, very key question for us, informal sector. How do we integrate informal sector players, collectors in EPR systems? What happens there? So here we have a few tools. You can set up an EPR system with a focus on collection targets. So if you set up a collection target, perhaps collect and soundly manage X amount of what was brought into the market by producers and importers. Producers simply interact with waste management companies. They interact with collectors and say, okay, we need this packaging. Fair enough. Collectors are already out there. They're already picking up fractions that give them value, what they can sell off. But now they know that this packaging type attracts this kind of monetary premium. They would collect that. Absolutely. Then, of course, you have informal sector workers integrated on some level. They are collecting targets are quickly filled. There's no bureaucracy. But what have you really done? This has created no structural changes or investment in collection systems. There is no improvement in working conditions. They simply did what they've always done, but simply focus on now a more valuable packaging stream. No? And of course, there is no source segregation. This mentioned there's limited quality of collected packaging waste. There's nothing going on in households. So in this way, with a focus on collection targets, you indeed get the integration of informal sector workers that you want, but with some caveats. Or you could go perhaps a more difficult way, where you focus on collection and source segregation. So in this way, you set the target in two ways. Collect and soundly manage at least X amount of what was brought on the market, and obliged parties shall ensure that at least X amount of households have a regular door-to-door collection for their packaging waste. And I say that in this way, interesting things begin to happen. Not only do they have to ensure that X amount is collected, they also have to ensure that somebody is going house to house, putting bins there, collecting them, sending them to waste management companies. This is an interesting scenario. Suddenly, producers need to enter into some form of contract. Now, who can enter into a contract? Perhaps an association. Perhaps some kind of coming together of waste collectors. You can see that with this process, there is a better chance of some kind of formalization of the system. Now, people come together, they are working as an association, suddenly they go, maybe I need a helmet. You know, maybe now I need gloves. Actually, now that I think about it, I need pension. So in this situation, you not only do you have perhaps door-to-door picking of waste, but you have also associations of collectors beginning to formalize, beginning to improve their living situations. Also, there's also an investment. This cost money, trucks, pickup bins, maybe different colors as we have in Germany. So you can see that this is not something that happens overnight. It takes more time. It's more time intensive. It's more resource intensive, but you have investment in waste collection systems. You have possibilities coming up where informal sector workers are beginning to improve, perhaps dream more. And then, of course, you have, improved quality of collected waste. Of course, you cannot just enter, I like to go back here, you don't just enter a community and start putting bins everywhere. So you invariably have to involve as well local municipalities, local authorities. You also have to think of education. You put a bin in front of my house and you think I put something in it. Well, what is it? Some level of community education needs to take place. So you can see that this system, a focus on collection and source segregation, even though a bit more intensive, leads to better results. But it's for you to consider, again, what works best in your local situation. Right. Again, to summarize on that question, focusing on collection would give you the needed volumes you need, but going more for perhaps an additional, more ambitious door-to-door collection would really yield to better results. I think when you do it in this way, you have more interesting results. Also, there is a lot more information there from our colleague, Marin Yeager. We encourage you to look into that because this is also a social inclusion topic. There's a lot of benefit here than simply waste collection. You can go in many interesting ways with this that could end up being far more beneficial. Now to look at the last question, stakeholders. How to reconcile different interests of the various stakeholders. What does everyone want? Again, let's look back at EPR. EPR is not simply for producers. Yes, producers have a huge interest. There's the extended producer responsibility. The conversation always goes back to producers, but they have an interest, but it has to be known that this is a burden to everyone, to all members of society, to people who are living in the community, to informal sector workers, to municipalities and governments. Everybody has their own interest, but the producer interest is to ensure that they are not disadvantaged, a level playing field. And also as a producer, as a business, what I would like to see is laws that are not changing willy-nilly or from day to day, new policies here, new policies there. It's important to be able to have reliability for business forecasting. I can make business decisions. I can perhaps forecast a bit. I need so-and-so workers in 2 or 3 years, or this is upcoming. So it's important to recognize the interests of producers, but also important to see what everyone else wants. So citizens and consumers, what do we want? I put myself now as a consumer. I want good products at affordable prices, as cheap as I can get it. I do not want my taxes to go up. I want to pay as less tax as possible. And if I have kids, I would like to take them to a playground where there's not metal or something that could cut someone. I want a clean and healthy environment. And how to solve that? Well, please communicate to me that even though there's EPR and maybe it might increase the price that I pay at the end of the day, it's not so much. And if I'm paying that price, that playground should be clean. There should be tangible improvements in the environment if indeed that additional cost is coming to me as a consumer. As a municipality, to introduce EPR, it should fit into the structure. Again, choose a system that works for you. If you put undue pressure or undue systems that simply, perhaps they fit for German municipalities, I wonder if they fit for Senegalese municipalities. They are not the same. So picking one system that has worked in one geographic area and transplanting it wholesale without any kind of local adaptation could be problematic. We look at waste managers and recyclers. You will likely not find many problems here. They are very, very happy. EPR means that they are going to be relied on by producers to fill their quotas, to be able to tell the government, hey, we have been able to collect back what we put on the market. So usually you don't have a lot of problems here if you do everything right. Informal collectors or informal workers just want to stay in business. The fear is with these new systems, are we going to lose jobs? This is what I do for livelihood. This is what I do to take my kids through school. Am I going to lose that? So this is the question on their minds. It's important to ensure that they have a role or there's a way forward that they can look forward to. You can refer to the previous slides to see what we've done there. Also to Marin Yeager to see how that also plays into social inclusion. Now, producers, fair competition. Again, remember the free rider. It's important to ensure that there is no disadvantage. If everyone is equally captured, if the cost of EPR is factored into everyone's cost of production, is transferred onto products, then the playing field is indeed level. The cost of products is simply based on market forces. There's not going to be a lot of opposition there. There should be simply clear rules, responsibilities, enforcement, of course, focused on free riders again, because in a lot of discussions, you will hear this, but I've been paying it and that individual has not been paying it. And how is that fair? Now you are really beginning to undermine your system. So it's important to be able to create that system that everyone knows what they're supposed to do. You do not create an unfair advantage. And it's also important to realize that in waste management, margins are very, very, very small. So if somebody is able to sidestep rules or sidestep responsibilities, this individual is making money, perhaps hand over fist. And then you really have a situation. Right. So to summarize, it is important to allocate responsibilities, but of course, bear in mind that there might be some conflicts. And in discussions with my colleagues, we discussed that perhaps if you set up an EPR system and you enter the meeting and everyone is happy and smiling at you, something has gone wrong. It's very, very unusual that you bring new rules onto a market and you say you have to pay for this, and producers look at you and nod their heads and they are smiling and happy. You should probably reflect on what you have done. So please expect some pushback, but be clear and be steadfast that responsibilities, including financial responsibilities, are allocated to producers. Right. Again, if well designed, there will be no disadvantages. If there's a level playing field, what is the source for complaint? Indeed, everything will go as planned. Perhaps, of course, there will be issues, they will come up, but you can indeed solve them. It's important that obligations are also politically reliable. If rules are changing every other day, you create an uncertain business environment. This really is a surefire way to undermine your system. Again, to reiterate the point, although costs might increase for products, you should communicate that options are limited. At least with EPR, producers have some incentive to design better and reduce packaging. If you look at the new upcoming rules for packaging waste regulations, this will for sure, in my opinion, improve design, because there's perhaps recyclability assessments. This is a bit going into eco-modulation, but there are ways, or EPR systems can be designed in such a way that they would positively improve packaging design, or indeed packaging volumes. And at least with EPR, you correlate consumer behavior a little bit, or you control consumer behavior. The more you buy, the more you pay. And it's honestly quite fair, because if you really want to enjoy that pineapple in the middle of winter, kept fresh in that packaging, which is really difficult to recycle, I think that you should at least pay something small for the end of life of that pineapple packaging that you have enjoyed. So this is, in short, our view on some of these questions, and really thank you for your attention. We really look forward to interacting with you more in subsequent sessions, and yeah, looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fred. This was really on point. Thanks so much. I have an echo again. If you could mute yourself quickly, that would be great. Thanks so much. I see a lot of clapping here, some reactions. Thanks. That was really great. And I see that there are already some questions in the chat that we will pick up now. We still have 50 minutes. You were really quick and on points. So this allows us to have a lot of time for questions and maybe also some discussions. Which is awesome. I see that there's a hand up. We can pick up you first of all. I think it was Reska. If you have a question, you can unmute yourself. Otherwise, I would pick up the questions from the chat. Do you have a question?
I thank you very much, Fez, for the presentation. I think it was a mistake. I just raised hand, but now I have the opportunity to just share my question. I shared in the chat my name is Riz Bevani from Germany. I'm also a PhD student. I'm working for a municipality. In some region, including Germany, there is a financially stable system for waste collection with a very high segregation rate, especially for recyclables. But the question is, you have shown two models. How do you consider or include the final disposal of this waste in your model? Because I have just seen only the government, the social aspect, and the producer. But how about the final disposal? Who is responsible for it, and how it is included in your model?
I'm not really sure which slide, for example, are you referring to? I didn't catch the question very clearly.
You have shown, I don't want to take all the time for, there are many people who are having questions. You have shown two models for two different models. One is government is responsible and organizing and one was no before. Exactly, this one you had it exactly here. Where is the final disposal for waste? Because as I mentioned, in some countries, there is high rate of segregation and financially stable system, but there is still waste export into poor countries. How the EPR plays a role to control or to limit this, to kind of try to make it a more circular economy, and to the final disposal or treatment should occur in the region, not exported. I hope my question is clear.
Maybe I can come in here. My name is Andreas Mannhardt. I was meant to be presenting this together with Fred. I did not because I have some fever. I don't feel too well, but I was still listening and following this, and I think I can probably pick this question. Basically, an EPR system, we of course spoke about, or Fred spoke about, collection volumes to be achieved, a certain percent of what was brought onto the market. This is the basis in most EPR systems. So you bring something onto the market and you have to manage a certain percentage. First, of course, it starts with collection, but this is also tied to treatment. So this collected volume must be treated in a high quality manner to be defined nationally, of course. So there is waste treatment regulation, there is recycling percentage, there is a criteria of what is accounted for recycling. And this question you raised, export to other countries, is basically enrooted in waste management laws in a country, not in an EPR law. So you say, for example, they must collect 80% obliged party of the packaging they brought onto the market. And recycling is then defined in other laws. And it can, for example, in Germany also mean that certain streams can move across boundaries if rules are followed. So if you look at waste exports, probably EPR is not the legal instrument to look at. It's the general waste regulation in a country that regulates transboundary movement of waste. I'm not sure if this answered your question, but of course, treatment is inherent part of EPR. So not only collection, but sound treatment, recycling mostly, but it can also be other treatment ways.
Thank
you very
Andreas.
much.
I hope that answered your question. Great. Thanks, Andreas, for stepping in. There are more questions in the chat. I will pick the first one that was by Susanne Karche. It's more of a comment, but maybe Fred or Andreas, you have a comment here too. What is the crux, in my opinion, is the way that how real costs are continued to be externalized, hidden to the consumer, but someone bears the full brunt of these costs. And she also shared that the African Circular Economy Network, together with WWF, did a study for INC3 and found that the Global South pays the price at large. It's more of a comment, I think, but maybe you have some reactions here.
This is difficult to react to spontaneously without really having read the study. But indeed, I agree that someone always pays the cost. You have to pay the boatman. Either we pay with EPR, with the options that we stated, or societies pay. And unfortunately, export is still ongoing. Export of products is still ongoing. But again, this speaks to some the limitations of EPR, as in transboundary shipment of goods is a different topic. Shipment of waste is a different topic. But within EPR, you're looking at perhaps the boundary conditions of EPR make it unsuitable for discussion within this arena, in my view. But yeah.
Thanks for your reaction. And I see that Susanne has raised her hand. I'd like to comment here.
Thank you so much. Hi, Frederick. Nice seeing you again. Yeah, I asked actually a real question further down, which was really related to, is it just a pipe dream, or would it be time perhaps to discuss global EPR obligation, harmonize global EPR obligations, for example, also how modulated fees are set This is just something that I know was discussed for e-waste. You know, there are voices that talk about the need for a global EPR system to, and my question is just, is this not something, given that we talk now at Inc. 3, also at the Global Plastic Treaty obligations, that perhaps the time is there that we look at global role players in the producer space and say, look, they are flogging their products everywhere. Every single country in the world is affected by, you know, the externalization of the cost in terms of pollution. Can we not kind of pull together something more like some basic global EPR principles that they have to adhere to, irrespective if a country is already that far? And I just say this coming from Africa because we are still emerging. There are still a lot of countries that are in the process of establishing EPR regulation. And for me, a lot of those producers just go through those legal loopholes. You know, they go where the weakest link is, and that really angers me. That, you know, countries that don't having that strong legal protection are at the receiving end of those companies making profits and not showing any remorse in terms of, you know, being responsible for what they cause. Thanks.
I think Andreas wants to take this one. Andreas?
Yes, a short one. Susanne, I can not agree more. My reaction on this, you're probably right that this needs to be thought through, but it's not a quick fix to the problems we have in these countries. We already see that national EPR systems, to be set up, to get functional, take a lot of time and resources. It's actually quite an effort to get an EPR system up and running. And I think complexity is unproportionately high when we think about a global one. This does not mean that I don't think it's not needed. But what models, what is the legal implications, who is responsible for what? I think the clearest cases are countries that, for various reasons, do not have the capacity to develop own EPR systems. For example, those who are really struggling with consequences of war, for example, but producers also selling products there, which they do. There could be some form of, okay, there is a fund responsibility to fund certain waste management aspects in such countries. But again, this is also not something that will give a quick fix. It's something to be discussed in parallel, I think, to EPR. And EPR has a legal rooting in the national jurisdictions, as we know it at the moment. So I think the one should be done, national EPR systems, but the thinking process, whether it should go beyond this, is, of course, I think, needed. And this is, of course, a personal opinion, not an opinion by GAP for EPR.
Thank you so much. I see there's one hand up by my colleague Cheton. I hope I pronounce your name right. I see it's a question to the slide that is shown. That's why I'm picking up that one first.
Okay, like thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the useful presentation. It was very informative, and I find it useful. So, in Kosovo, we are now working on EPR, establishing or making the legal framework for EPR. But what we do not have so far, we don't have mechanisms in place. And we are tackling EPR for WEEE, for batteries, accumulators, and for end-of-life vehicles. And I was just thinking about the PRO and how to make this mandatory. So I know that it is useful to have this process organized by the private sector. So the government should set the legal framework, targets, and the timeline and obligations that are to be met by the private sector. But I was thinking, what is the best solution? Can it be that PRO can be for profit, or should it be non-profit and organized by producers, retailers, and importers? And if that is the case, what is the mechanism that government has in hand to make the private sector organized and establish the PRO? So what are those mechanisms that can be introduced by the government besides the targets that you can set in the legislation, and fines and sanctions that can be set also in the legislation.
This is, you're right. Perhaps for me, more important is monitoring. You have to monitor. If you are going the way where government sets up legislation and simply leaves it to PROs, we do not recommend one way or the other. Again, it has to be based on your local situation. That's one way to go. But it's important to monitor. It's important to enforce. Of course, also go in a stepwise direction. Go in a phased situation where you increase your scope over time, not simply starting all together at once with all products in scope. But to say go this way or go that way, this would be difficult to judge because we do not know what is the local situation on the ground. Yeah, I think Andreas has more information on this, so I would leave it to him then.
I mean, when you draft a legal framework, you can, of course, specify or allow for PROs to be set up. And it's, of course, a decision whether you go as our monopolistic non-profit PRO, this is a common model, or a profit-orientated competition model, where it allows various PROs to be set up in parallel. So I think we'll in a next webinar cover this topic because it's quite a big one. Just in a nutshell, both I think have strengths and weaknesses, particular strengths and weaknesses. Competing profit PROs are not so transparent. They can negotiate prices for a ton of a certain type of packaging with their clients, which are the producers, as they wish. They don't have to be transparent in the prices they raised. So transparency is a bit difficult. Also, in some jurisdiction, modulation of EPR fees is difficult because you're very soon in conflict with antitrust laws. So we come to this, I think, in another webinar. The PRO design, I think PROs will form automatically because the logical consequence of your obligations. If every producer would set up an own collection system, it would be chaos. It would be inefficient. For some systems, for example, for e-waste, for batteries, you might allow this. There might be brands who say, oh, we are so big, we do in our own system. So you can leave the option, either work with a PRO or you do it individually. But for packaging, probably you want everybody to join a PRO, because otherwise it would be chaos if a certain producer is setting up an own system and another system. So the producer would not know what to do. So there you could probably oblige in your law that producers shall join a PRO and have to prove that they join a PRO. Whether you go a monopolistic way or a competition model is, I think, food enough for at least one more webinar.
Thank you, Andreas and Fred. I hope that answered your question. And there's a follow-up question by Joseph, a follow-up question to the very first one. He's happy with the response of Andreas, but he wants to focus on disposal again. How is the funding made available for disposal for problematic options that are not recyclable? My question is also at the backdrop of fractions of waste that we do not have solutions for and are here in Africa, and funds may have already been collected for instance, in Europe. So this also relates a bit to the question of Susanne with the global EPR.
Yes, again, with these two models that we have in both situations, this is actually very, very beneficial for products that there's no profit. For example, they are not self-financing. So you take either eco fees, eco taxes, and this is what should finance PROs or recyclers engaged in such activities. It's the same. If government sets the laws and takes their financing, then government is responsible to pay PROs for the work that they put in to recycle these fractions. If PROs are set up by privately organized systems, by producers, then producers directly have to finance the management of these fractions. But again, as Andrea said, global EPR, this is a nice utopia, but to get there, this is difficult. And personally, I don't know if there's any law where they directly spell out this is EPR, but rather you will see it in the waste management law. You see parts and pieces of the two models that we have put here in these laws. Sometimes you even see a combination of both. So it's not one style. It depends. Again, you have traditional privately organized systems in the EU, but you also have specific situations, for example, cigarette filters, where taxes are taken to finance the end of life of taking care of cigarette filters, what you can do nothing with, basically, if I know right. So I hope it answers the question somewhat. I know it does not fully answer the question, but this is one of those questions where a full answer is rather difficult at this point in time.
Great, thank you. Great. Moving on to another topic, materials, and there were two questions in the chat. So the first one was why beverage cartons are not considered composite materials, since they typically include plastic and aluminium layers. And then the second one, do you think that EPR should be on non-packaging plastic waste also?
I think I designed the slide, and this was a fictional example. Of course, the composite material. It was just a fictional example to illustrate, screen out, if you are scarce in resources and want to start and have a big impact on the environment, on waste management, it's an option to focus on a waste type that is, in your country, a problematic waste type, which is very often a laminate. It can also be a beverage carton, which I agree. It can also be, you know, these foam-type styrofoam packaging, which is also problematic. Laminates are very often a very good hit, a very good guess for problematic waste. You know, they're blown away by the wind, they're everywhere, they don't have a value, so they're a burden to waste managers. So the message was screen out the packaging types that are a particular concern and don't have enough value that they're managed at the moment anyway. So rigids, for example, they very often have enough value so that, you know, some people pick them up, at least in urban areas, and give them to recycling. So focus on those that don't. So this was a sketch, non-representative. Please don't take it too serious.
Great, thanks, Andreas. Anything to add here, Fred?
No, but I would like to hear from Mr. Oliver Boachi, because his hand is up.
Thank you very much, Frederick. I want to go back to Susan's question about a global EPR scheme, which Frederick has said might be utopia, and I think there have been some other comments about such a scheme. You know, Ghana has proposed a global plastic pollution fee with the aim of getting it as part of the global plastic treaty that is currently being negotiated. And we think that it is not as complex as we make it sound. First, if you look at the various EPRs that are operating at the national level right now, as you said in your presentation, there are different models, and these models are based on the peculiar circumstances of each country. If we look at a global EPR scheme as opposed to a national EPR scheme, we are looking at those producers whose products end up on the global market. In other words, the polymer producers and the virgin plastic producers. Their products end up on all markets. And so if we are looking at a polluter or a producer whose products end up on the global market, these are the ones that we are targeting. And so if you are looking at the obliged, in a register of the obliged, these are the ones who should go into that register. That's number one. Number two, if we collect fees from these producers based on the volumes of their production, they can go into a fund that is accessible by all countries. And so if a country has, you know, one type of system as opposed to another, if we have standards that are used to define what EPRs should be, then every country can apply to this fund and be able to be, provided the resources for them to establish the EPR scheme that works for them. And so if we combine this fees and the fund together with a network of PROs, and so these network of PROs become an umbrella organization. You can call that the global PRO, but it's a collection of different PROs who are operating at the various countries based on the peculiar circumstances of that country. And a combination of these three, the fund, the levy, and the umbrella PROs, you can actually implement a global EPR scheme. I know it's not going to be easy, but that shouldn't stop us from implementing it. And if you look at the approach that you have already proposed, doing it gradually, eventually we can get a scheme that is at a global level and addresses the EPR needs of every country. And I think even with that, other elements such as education, awareness creation, capacity building, all of that can be supported with the levies that we are collecting and putting in this fund. So this, in a nutshell, will be what we call a global EPR scheme.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boachi. I broadly agree, but we have to see what is the impact of the system as proposed by you. And for me, also, it's important that in doing that, we do not forget inclusion. For example, for collectors who are depending on this as well for their livelihood in the current moment. It's difficult to do, and I believe it's possible, but I think it will take quite some time. But really, we are looking forward to see what developments come out of there and to see how to increase the scope then to harmonize these systems, perhaps going through how we've harmonized standards and the harmonization of product scope for we. Also, we did this for the battery regulation for textiles. This is possible, but you will agree this will take quite some work. This would be quite a dream. I would love to see it, but yeah. Andreas?
Yes, thank you. This is not in contradiction or so, just some thoughts on it. I mean, the charming way of EPR, making producer responsible for collection and management, is at least theoretically that the producers have an incentive to reduce and to introduce a better design for recycling. If you have such a global system, this link is lost. So this is to be considered. I also have confessed that the hopes that EPR implementation with the producers hopefully improve the design and reduce packaging did not really fulfill over the last decades. Nevertheless, we should not give up on this idea. After all, raising money to clean up waste cannot be the only answer. We need to get away from ever-growing waste volumes. So this is just to be considered. Probably both models are not the perfect answer to reduction. And I don't say we don't have to think about global EPR. Of course we have, but let's also be realistic and look in the countries what can we do with their own laws. On the global one, just one caveat might be that we don't have a global tax administration. So who would collect the fees and who would enforce if they're not paid? So that's probably one challenge which is not to be underestimated. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Oliver Boachi, and thanks, Frederick and Andreas, for reacting. I see, Oliver, you have your hand up again. Would you like to react?
Yeah, I wanted to react to what Andreas just said. First of all, I agree with him that EPR schemes sometimes motivations for the brand owners to come up with better ways of packaging and all of that. Now, this global EPR scheme that we are also proposing creates the same motivation, because if we include eco-modulation schemes into the levies that we are collecting based on the volumes, first, it's it's a way of getting these producers to reduce the volumes that they are producing. And secondly, if they produce better or design better plastics, eco-modulation principles can be applied so that what they are putting on the market eventually become recyclable. So there are ways of addressing this in the proposal that we have made. In fact, it is not just a means of implementation, it is also a control measure, because if we are asking designers to design better plastics, and based on that, we reduce the rates of levies that we are collecting, then it becomes an incentive for them to design better products and reduce the levels of production. Now, one question that has come up most of the time is that if we put these levies on the producers, they are likely to pass the cost on to the consumer. Again, I think that first we need to understand that the consumer for the virgin plastics producers are the packaging companies most of the time, and not the end user on the downstream segments of the chain. And if these producers are going to pass the cost on to the packaging companies or the brand owners, the tendency for them, for the brand owners, is to now looking at how to use recycled material instead of the virgin plastics. Now, if you want to promote circular economy in the plastics life cycle or the plastics value chain, this will be the best way of doing it. If you combine that with certain minimum content of recycled products into legal frameworks, then it becomes a very, very good way of creating a circular economy within the plastics value chain. So these are two things that I wanted to add to what I had said before, and in reaction to Mahat's comments.
Thank you so much, Oliver. And I think the topic of global EPR scheme will be a big topic also for the near future. Maybe we can also take this topic up in our community, because yeah, it is definitely a thing to consider. I don't know, Fred or Andreas, would you like to react again to this addition? Okay. Then I see there's another hand up by Joseph. Is that also related to the question of global EPR or another topic?
No, I mean, it initially was a question, but then, I mean, listening to what Fred, Andreas, and Mr. Oliver Boache has said, I wouldn't say much on that, but then would rather want to say that if you have a lot of problems, you cannot solve all of them all at once. Categorization is good, but then I believe that if we can single out, problems and tackle them one after the other, we may have some good solutions. So if we fall back on a question like, I mean, looking at all these problems that we are looking at tackling, has there been a solution for, let's say, maybe packaging or virgin plastics? If we can look at it from that perspective as well, then we can say that, I mean, it's a long journey, as Fred keeps saying. It's possible, but then it might take a while. So if it would take a while, can we look at solving one of them and say that we are taking this one to completion, and then probably look at even looking at that solution to replicate on others or try on others to see that we have really resolved one problem and we can take it off our list? It's just a quick comment I would want to pass in this moment, listening to what has already been said. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Joseph. I see there, Andreas, you would like to react?
Yes, thanks for this one. Probably our intervention sounded too negative. And it's actually true. I would say there is not the perfect EPR system resolving everything, but there are a lot of success stories with EPR. And very often they're not visible because the waste is not visible anymore. India, for example, started its EPR system really focusing on worst polluting plastic types. So there was the target for laminates that certain collected volumes need to be achieved, and it worked. And then they expanded further. There might be more specialists in India here in this room, but we've seen a number of countries that actually is, in terms of segregation of source, collecting of packaging waste, recycling them, achievements have been done in a number of countries. Of course, European countries, there are decades of experience now with implementation. We have source segregation, which more or less works. The recycling rates are okay. We have not achieved successfully on waste reduction targets or better design, for example. But tackling the waste that is housed in the bin, their EPR in many countries is gaining momentum. So yes, and you're right, tackle the problem bit by bit. I think this is also a message we wanted to transmit today. Nevertheless, be aware that EPR is not the silver bullet for everything. Waste reduction targets, for example, have so far not been successfully achieved with EPR measures.
Great, thanks so much for that reaction. Because you were just speaking about waste reduction, there was one question in the chat: should EPR laws include source reduction targets? And also related to regulation enforcement, there's another question: clearly allocating EPR obligations and creating a level playing field cannot be stressed enough. Is there more to say about how you are working on that?
I think I would want more comments from Andreas on this, but source reduction, that is controlling the behavior of households. Is this consumer reduction or consumption reduction, for example? This is what we say: if there is some marginal cost on products, the more you consume, the more you pay, then it really depends on the strength of your pocket and your consumption appetite. So if that, perhaps we have to wait with EPR, you have to wait for a while to see what the data says. What has that really resulted in consumption reduction or not? This is difficult to say. Andreas?
Yes, so we are not aware of a case where EPR led to reduction of waste volumes. So it's in its history a tool saying we shift the responsibility to manage the waste that is arising from packaging, and do not challenge the fundamental basics that private companies sell products, want to make profit, want to grow. There was and still is the hope that EPR has an influence on recyclability and not use of unnecessary packaging. There is not strong evidence that there is a mechanism, simply because what Fred also showed, the price for compliance is actually not so high. So for packaging, very often in the consideration, the area you can put advertisement for your product on is probably more valuable as the additional cost. So here, waste reduction targets so far have not been achieved, but they have also not been tried out. So most EPR laws don't foresee waste reduction targets. There were some in Germany, some successes with promoting reusable packaging in the beverage bottle segment. But this is a specific field. So at the moment, a lot of people are thinking, how can we use various policy tools, not only EPR, to achieve reduction targets? This is at the moment also in the European Union a huge debate. We see, despite managing our waste properly, waste volumes are ever increasing, which can't be continued forever.
But maybe we should have hope for the packaging waste regulation. I'm really, really hopeful. I'm really happy about this regulation with the recyclability assessment. I really hope that this would help in the redesign of packaging. I don't know. As a community, let's look at it. Let's see if it works and gives out the benefits that we hold out for. I think Cyclos was involved in designing the recyclability assessment, for example, to be used in a packaging regulation. I'm not so sure, but let's see how that goes. And if it works, this is how it is. Then perhaps it can be replicated, and then we can see the reduction that we all hope for. But again, it remains to be seen.
Great, thank you. Susanna has a bit of a provocative follow-up question. So does EPR lock us into linear economy business as usual scenarios if they do not perform regarding source reduction? Perhaps real disruption is needed.
And yeah, perhaps I can just give a context, with my African circular economy network hat on. We talk a lot about disruption, saying, sometimes the old system just doesn't serve us. And we continue to talk about packaging material and putting prices on packaging material. But do we actually ask the hard questions? How do we redesign distribution systems? Are we really looking at alternative materials and things like this? And this all goes out of the window, hence my little mean question. But I would like to hear what everyone else is saying about it.
I mean, my first reaction would be in no environmental aspect, things were resolved by one intervention. It was always a combination. So EPR is certainly a tool we should not scrap because it's not perfectly efficient. It has strengths and weaknesses. It has its role. I would say, yes, reduction targets should be thought around. I think the disruptive energy is more needed in the setup our economies work. And this is that, companies are designed to grow and sell more. And this is the fundamental principle actually EPR does not challenge. And I'm not sure if it can be challenged through EPR. It may be through certain reuse targets, for example, that can be introduced for certain packaging types, such as beverage bottles. It's, for your thinking, probably not too disruptive enough, which you might be right. But I would not give up on EPR just because it does not resolve use of materials and volumes. So EPR is certainly a useful topic, which if we miss it, would miss, as Fred said, someone else would have to pay the costs for managing the waste that still arises. How do we manage the problem of ever increasing waste volumes is a question where we should think about EPR, but probably not only. Probably other policy tools can also help.
Thank you so much, Andreas. Coming back to the second question related to regulation enforcement, creating a level playing field and enforcing EPR obligations. The question was, is there more to say about how you are working on that? I think it's a rather general question. I guess it also depends on the specific country context.
I mean, in any country you start discussing EPR, there is, at least in my feeling, by producers, a certain fear that a mandatory scheme would overwhelm it. And I think the fear is not a fear of EPR, it's a fear that a rule comes into place that interferes with their regular business. So this is why I think in many countries, things like voluntary EPR are propagated to saying, please, government, don't interfere with our business. We do it voluntary. Nevertheless, voluntary for the producers who join it have a significant disadvantage. This is not a level playing field anymore. Every expenditure is a disadvantage because others do not have the expenditure. And as Fred said, I think the ideal system would be a level playing field, but it's hard to be achieved. Free riders are a problem in all systems. And what we wanted to say with these slides, actually, setting up an EPR scheme does naturally provoke a certain skepticism, probably opposition. But the aim would be to have a mandatory system that works, that is not a bureaucratic monster, and that sets a level playing field again, where all the producers bringing packaging onto the market have the same burden, so they don't have a disadvantage in between of them. Nevertheless, to get there, I think what we experienced, there are a lot of concerns that rules might be introduced that might either not achieve this or that might put a lot of administrative, probably also cost burdens onto the producers. So I think in the way to functional EPR, all these turbulences need to be anticipated. I'm not sure if this answers the question, but what we experienced in a lot of our work with attempts to set up EPR systems in countries where EPR is not yet established.
Great, thanks. Andreas, I have one more question on the informal sector integration. How do you integrate the informal sector into source segregation models? It can often happen that informal workers harvest containers, the target at separating at source, leaving companies with low value residuals. Do you have experience in your project with setting up public or private collection infrastructure and informal integration? It was a question by Danielle.
I believe we dealt with that question looking at how to integrate informal sector workers. Again, there are two ways to do it. If you have legislation that stipulates that household systems, you should have collection from door to door systems, for example, the yellow bin, for example, which is financed partly through EPR or fully, I'm not so sure, then you have the opportunity to integrate informal sectors in this way. But really, it's not just having the bins there is one thing, having somebody collecting it is one thing, but having consumers also use it is another. So you need that education for the use of the bin. Even here in Germany, sometimes I go downstairs and I open the bin and it's full of whatever, irrespective of color. So it's important to look at it again from a holistic approach. There's education involved, there's local municipalities involved. If you want informal sectors involved, you have to see what is the system you're implementing. Is it just collection? Or are you also putting it in law that source segregation should also happen? Then you create the system that producers and PROs have. Perhaps the best option would be to involve informal sector workers who already are in the communities. They know where the waste is. They know where everyone lives. In my home country, for example, you just be at home and somebody comes knocking on your door and ask you, do you have any e-waste that you want to get rid of? Because they know you. They know you bought this 3 years ago, and it's time to get rid of it. So if you create the legal framework, or you sort of channel the river in that kind of way, you have a better chance of having informal sector involvement. But there is no direct way. You cannot force this in that way. You cannot mandate that in that way. You can encourage, I believe, you can create the necessary environment for informal sector participation. But there is, of course, limitations to what you can do to people. That's my personal thought on that.
On the second model we've shown, where the EPR system is basically responsible, or the obliged parties, to set up a door-to-door, a source segregation door-to-door of packaging waste, this needs to be done by somebody. So they can either hire a multinational company or a big company to send the workers, or use existing structures. And of course, they would need a structure they can sign a contract, so an organization, not an informal one. It must at least be an association that is registered. And this very often depends on the local contexts, and very often to the municipal context. Some municipalities already encouraged informal collectors to form associations rather than competing with a formal system. Of course, there is the scenario that informals will still be there, steal away or take out valuable fractions and do the cherry pick, and others would collect the rest. In an ideal scenario, you would have the informal people getting formalized and then have the ownership over a certain part of the city and say, this is our area. There is where we're doing the collection. Now we don't do it for our waste sales anymore, but as service provided to a PRO or to a waste management system. But of course, I'm not the one who has most experiences in this. There's a couple of literature also being posted in the chat. So probably there are more experiences on how to do this, what are typical aspects to look at it.
Yes, thanks, you too. Like mentioned before, the Social Inclusion Subworking Group of Prevent Waste Alliance is currently working on the fact sheet informal waste pickers integration, and the updated version will be published soon. And someone posted, for example, also the 2016 OECD EPR manual in the chat. There's also a useful chapter on informal worker in there. Thanks for sharing. I see there's another question. Someone joined late and he's asking, has there been any discussion of environmental assessment of EPR systems? So for example, greenhouse gas gases rather than recycling rates. We haven't touched that point, so maybe we could use the last minutes for this topic.
Yes, there is one. I'm aware of one in the German system, which was done by colleagues of us at Eco Institute, and it clearly shows a very positive benefit. And I can't recall all the numbers. What was particularly interesting is that the extra mileage that need to be by collection trucks to collect packaging waste separate from other waste had almost no influence on the positive picture. So of course you need a bit of more truck rides probably to pick up separate collected packaging waste, but in the end, in the balance, it was overly very positive. Of course, the baseline scenario is, non-source segregated municipal solid waste management with lower recycling rates. If needed, I can see if the study is available. I can search it, provide it later. I'm not sure if it's also available in English or as a summary if it's available in English.
Thanks, Andreas. That would be very helpful. And maybe as a last question, how can small island development states be motivated to organize EPR schemes when they have such small markets with little power to influence producers or importers? There were also some studies shared on small island development states. I know it's a very specific question, but maybe you have some experience here too.
Can we agree to pick this question up in one of the next webinars, because it's really food for thought for all of us?
Sure, we can do that. And I think that's the perfect word to close the session. Thank you so much, Frederic and Andreas, for sharing your expertise, for answering all these questions. Thanks to all of you for posing so many questions. I think this was a great first webinar. Please be reminded there will be 2 more this year. And then, of course, we will organize more sessions in the next year on behalf of the Global Action Partnership for EPR. So thank you again to all of you, and yeah, I wish you a nice end of the day. I see there are 2 more hands. Anything important to share? No, they disappeared. I think this was just a high five maybe. Thanks to all of you. Have a good day.